Good evening. Uh, Good morning, everyone. I'm very, very delighted to welcome you all to the special session of the Health Systems Research Symposium, today, the 10th of March. The title of this symposium is Of Success and Second Waves, and we're looking at COVID-19 responses in Vietnam and in India with a focus on the state of Kerala. We had proposed this panel at a time when second waves were occurring all over the globe, while at the same time there was appreciation and admiration for the responses in certain parts of the world, two of which are showcased here. And I think some time has passed since we proposed this, and a lot of lessons have emerged on what the COVID epidemic has taught us about our health systems and about our agility to respond to outbreaks more broadly. So it is with great, great pride and admiration that I welcome our esteemed panelists here today. I will be introducing our chair, who will in turn introduce our panelists from Vietnam and India. But I'm very grateful. I recognize that you all are very busy people, actually working on the front lines, doing the work of the COVID response, and it is no small feat for you to actually make the time to be here. So I'm very grateful for that. Thanks also are due to the Oxford Clinical Research Unit and Professor Guy Marks from the University of New South Wales, who's helped us make these critical connections and allow us the opportunity to think together across nations about the COVID response. A few logistical issues before I hand over to our esteemed chair. Please feel free to put in questions into the question and answer box in the on-air platform. Do note that the question and answer function on Zoom is not working. It's actually through the on-air function that we will be trying to have our back and forth. Now I'd like to introduce our chair for this session this evening. Our chair is Rajiv Sadanandan, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Health Systems Transformation Platform, which is a think tank on health policy and systems based out of India. He has worked as the Health Secretary of Kerala State, as the Chief Executive Officer of the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana of India, India's national social health insurance scheme, in addition to holding numerous other prestigious posts in state and central governments. Mr. Sadanandan has worked for a brief stint at UNAIDS, and he has also been a member of technical committees set up by the World Health Organization, as well as other UN agencies. He was a member of the external editorial committee of the WHO report on cancer, as example, and currently serves as one of the commissioners on the Lancet Global Health Commission on financing primary healthcare. He's also a mentor to me, and I'm very grateful that he accepted this invitation to lead us through this discussion. Over to you, Rajiv, sir.
Thank you, Devaki, and thank you for your kind words. And I thank the organizers for letting me participate in this very interesting session. Now, for people like us who've been working in public health, COVID-19 has challenged not only the health systems, but also the economic, social, and even political structures in most part of the world. Some of our understanding of public health and health systems have been affirmed, some challenged. This is not the first pandemic, nor will be the last. This is an opportunity for us to learn and prepare for a more effective response to future pandemics. Every response to COVID-19 should therefore be studied to understand the positive and negative fallout of the strategies countries and communities had adopted. While some of these are highly contextual, there appears to be common elements that have universal relevance. This is a time for countries to be learning from each other. Today, we present two geographies that have very different trajectories of the disease: the Socialist Republic of Vietnam and the Indian state of Kerala. One is an independent sovereign nation, the other the unit of a federal nation. Vietnam has nearly 3 times Kerala's population and roughly the same per capita income, similar government health system right up to the primary health centers and village level health workers. Most importantly, Vietnam had the experience of successfully tackling the SARS epidemic, and Kerala modeled their efforts on the experience of managing the Nipah outbreak. Important differences. Most hospitals in Vietnam are in the public sector. Less than 15% are private. In Kerala, it's a private sector that dominates, roughly 70%. The population of Vietnam is relatively young. Less than 70%, 7% is aged above 60, while in Kerala, it is more than 15%. Financial protection through social health insurance is available to more than 70% in Vietnam, less than 50% in Kerala. So important differences and interesting similarities. So we will now proceed to hear from two countries, the two sets of presenters on how Vietnam and Kerala manage a response to COVID-19. I start with Vietnam. Dr. Thu An Nguyen is an epidemiologist and a social scientist by training with more than 20 years of experience. She holds an honorary position as a senior clinical lecturer at the University of Sydney and is the head of the Woolcock Institute of Medical Research in Vietnam, where she has led a team of over 60 staff from 3 offices. She has been an investigator for multidisciplinary research projects on health, agriculture, technology application, human behaviors, gender equity, and economic empowerment. She has also worked occasionally as senior consultant for UNAIDS Asia Pacific region, WHO, and international NGOs on in development work. Over to you, Dr. Nguyen.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sadananda, for your introduction. Can you see my slide now?
Yes, we can.
Thank you for inviting me to share the experience of how Vietnam fight against COVID-19. By the 7th March 2021, Vietnam reported to have 2,512 cumulative COVID-19 cases. Of those, 76% recovered and 35 people died of COVID-19. As you can see from this graph, this presents number of daily COVID-19 new cases in Vietnam since the early of the pandemic until the 7th of March. And Vietnam has experienced 3 major outbreaks. Early in March 2021, when we found a case imported from UK to Vietnam and slowly spreading into the community. The second outbreak was found in the end of July 2020, which is quite severe in one of the provinces and spreading to more than 10 provinces in the country. And the outbreak was suppressed after 40 days. And we have some peaceful time until recently. By the end of January 2021, we found another big outbreak in one of the province with young laborers who travel a lot and work in factories, who likely to expose to other young workers and spreading the virus. And this cluster was identified as being driven by the variant B.1.1.7 from the UK. So it's spreading very quickly, and now it is, we could consider that this outbreak is under control now. So what helped Vietnam to control 3 outbreaks since early last year until now? I could summarize in some of the key lessons learned. First of all, the response in Vietnam is very rapid, very strong, and has multi-sectoral collaboration between health sector and various sectors in the country. And we learned this from the experience in controlling SARS in 2003 and H1N1 in 2009. For example, the most recent outbreak, we received a report from Japan of one COVID-19 case found among a worker traveled to Japan to work. So the 25th, we received the report, and on the 27th, the country already started the whole system to track the contact of those cases and to test all the contact with those cases. The rapid case investigation was very fast and conducted it to not only close contact, but also the second-hand contact, meaning contact of the contact, and further on. The second lesson we learned is we apply what I call test, trace, and quarantine approach on epidemiological risk of infection. For testing, the country tests targeted high-risk group, including people traveling from overseas, close contact of the COVID-19 cases, and people with suspected disease, including people with symptoms or even people who died without any reason that could be identified, or people living in the community with the outbreak, regardless of their symptoms. And testing capacity increased quickly by because the country was able to produce the test kit itself, as well as using the pooling approach to test quite high number of people. The country also actively conducting the virological surveillance for new variants to identify epidemiological risk of transmission in different areas. Secondly, the country traced the first-hand and second-hand contact, and later on in the most recent outbreak, we also trace the third-hand contact of the confirmed cases rigorously and very rapid. Every minute was counted during the contact investigation, and technology was used, community policemen was used to help with contact investigation. You can see when I say first hand, second hand, and third hand contact, you can see from the right hand side in the middle is the index case, meaning the COVID-19 case. And anyone who exposed to the case is considered as a first hand or F1 contact. And anyone contact with the F1 is considered as secondary second hand contact or F2 and then F3. So in the recent outbreak, the country tested for F1, F2, and F3 to identify the cases quickly to avoid the further transmission to the community. And all the cases was labeled and marked for management. 14-day centralized quarantine was applied for people with history of exposure to confirmed case or suspected cases or people who travel from other country to Vietnam, regardless of the test result. People will be released from the quarantine center only if they have 2 tests negative, and they will be checked regularly for symptom and temperature. And it may be a surprise to you, but by today, there's 45,000 people under quarantine at this moment, including 500 in hospital, nearly 50,000 isolated at home, and 30,000 in the centralized facility. And cumulatively from early the pandemic, we have been quarantined 14 million people in total. The next one is targeted lockdown of the community with a size of 10,000 to 2,000 residents for at least 21 days when we found a transmitted cases in the community with unknown infection, unknown source of infection. And every people in that community will be checked on symptom and temperature, body temperature daily, will be tested for SARS-CoV-2 by real-time PCR test, or even do a mass serology testing, and they will be provided basic food and healthcare and necessary goods to be able to live for 21 days. Mass communication was introduced nationwide, and what we call is 5K, is standing, a short name standing for mask, distance, hand wash, not gathering, and health declaration that everyone in the community is expected to do. Social distancing, travel restriction, border closure, and school closure was conducted in stage depending on how far the transmission goes. So in summary, there are 5 lessons learned that we could draw. First of all, we need to have a leadership and investment in public health to take action promptly, quickly through the existing health system. The second lesson learned is with this pandemic, we need to act very, very fast. And as I said before, every minute count for the response. The earlier we take action, the less severe we have to suffer. We need to detect case early and detain or quarantine those cases. Communication need to be done well to gain trust and compliance from the community. And border restriction is very important because we know we don't have capacity. If there's a lot of cases in the country, then the health system cannot deal with that. So border restriction to reduce number of infection is important. Thank you for your attention. That's my end of my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Nguyen. It was very a good summary of the classic techniques of the public health techniques of tracking, tracing, quarantine, lockdowns, and which, by the numbers you've shown, have been highly successful. Thank you very much. We now move on to the second presenter from Vietnam, Dr. Quang Hoang Quoc. He is a Vice Director of the Pasteur Institute in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. He spent his academic career at the University of Medicine and Pharmacy, University of Victor Segal in Bordeaux, Oxford University Clinical Research Unit, and the Pasteur Institute in Ho Chi Minh City. Dr. Quang is responsible for microbiology and immunology, BSL-3 and training. He has achieved a wide range of grants from the Wellcome Trust Grant to National Funding for Research, which includes HPV, HFMD, SARS-CoV-2. He has a credit of having examined the first primer probe set made in Vietnam for the first wave of COVID-19 and directly participated in the Da Nang outbreak prevention and control. Over to you, Dr. Quoc.
Thank you for the introduction. Good evening, college. I would like to give you a brief information about how Vietnam encountered the COVID-19 epidemics. So the Vietnam first cases were detected on January 23rd last year in a man from Wuhan by our team at Pasteur Institute. His were believed to be the source of infection for his son, who were living in treatment at the time. Based on this cluster, the evidence from human to human transmission of SARS-CoV-2 were recorded first time outside of China. The incubation period of his son infections is found to be less than 3 days. Until March 2021, we detected 2,524 cases with the incidence estimated at about 2.6 cases per 100,000 populations. There were 35 deaths with the underlying disease, and we estimated the case fatalities rate is about 1.4%. Across the countries, there were 48 out of 3 provinces that affected by the epidemic. Until now, we experienced 3 epidemic waves. The first Vietnam, in the north to the south, and the third wave occurs in all 3 regions. The biggest outbreak occurs in Da Nang last year between July and September, which about 550 cases, and most of the death cases occur in Da Nang due to the chronic disease that the patient has suffered from the chronic kidney disease. I myself participated in the outbreak investigation team to have Da Nang at that time. So right after we arrived in Da Nang, we support them to improve the testing capacities, also the tracing, contact tracing capacity, and thanks to of the government that we can stop the transmission in Da Nang in one month and a half. So the cities were under a very strict lockdown at that time, and the testing capacities is improved significantly through the pooling sample strategies. In order to determine the origins of the epidemic, we do the full genome sequencing of all strain imported to Vietnam. So far, we detected all strain from Wuhan, from UK, from Brazil, and South Africa. In order to control the COVID-19's epidemic, we have implemented the strategy for 4 main actions. First, we reduce imported cases. The second action to enhance the surveillance system, tracing and testing and isolation capacity of the cases. The third action is on sharing correct information to change the community behavior. And the last but not least, we focus on research and fighting and countermeasures such as test kit production and vaccine productions. First of all, we reduce the imported infectious cases by approaching the early banned flight from China and other affected countries. The second, we improve the screening and isolated passenger with symptom or history of exposure as bordered. It's mandatory to quarantine 14 days and testing for all international passenger entering Vietnam. And we also conduct a very timely close border with a neighboring country, with China, Cambodia, and Laos, seen very early in the first waves of the epidemics. The second key response in Vietnam has adopted is enhancement of surveillance system, contact tracing, and testing isolation capacity of cases. Let's take an example from an outbreak in Ho Chi Minh City. That's what an outbreak occurred in mid-March last year in a bar in Ho Chi Minh City. And right after the first cases were detected in the communities, we apply the testing and contact tracing for all the people that have the contact with the case, the suspected cases from this bar. Thanks to the effort from health sector and also the to contact nearly 800 persons, we adapted very quickly the direction from the city government to stop the mass gathering and stop all the activity related to culture, sport, entertainment, stop the business activities, and avoid traveling between provinces. Right after the direction, we also applied the social distancing within 15 days in April 1st. And thanks to this comprehensive approach that we can stop the transmission within 3 weeks from the first outbreak. The third key action is information sharing and change community behaviors. On February 15th, 3 weeks after the first cases, the acting Minister of Health aired about warning messages about danger and loss of transmissions as part of the National Risk Communication Strategy, which focuses on the timeliness, transparency, and precision and reliability of COVID-19 information to gain the engagement from the communities. The Ministry of Health, with support from leading telecom and informatic technology companies, we develop and launch information's website and application that was used widely through the communities, so-called the nCoV app and Blue Zone, to trace all the contacts through the mobile app. And through the social network, Ministry of Health has sent information and update of the situation of public of COVID-19 real time for the citizen of the countries. We use a large number of text messages, approximately 27 million messages to release to the communities. So to raise awareness of wearing masks and hand hygiene, we have implemented some circulation on January 15. The Ministry of Health recommended a face mask worn for people contacting with a person with a respiratory illness. And later on in March 16, wearing a mask became mandatory in public places, and hand washing were also recommended. Thanks to this campaign, that 90% of the reporting cases always wearing a mask. Moreover, from our research results, adapted behavior and symptomatic testing are crucial for COVID-19 prevention strategies. To estimate the reach of the epidemic. If mass uses and testing rate declines, the epidemic could rebound. And last but not least, we continuously develop different measures to adapt the COVID-19 circumstances, such as we apply a strict surveillance system and rapid sequencing to identify the imported variant from the UK in December 2020. We also conducted a lot of research related to the isolation and full genome sequencing. We also create and produce the real-time PCR testing kit for local market, and also to export for other countries. In the meantime, COVID vaccines are under examinations. The non-COVID vaccines are under phase 3 clinical trials, and the other vaccines are under the Ministry of Health reviews. So like all the country, the current situation in Vietnam is the balance between COVID fighting and the economic growth. So it is the request from the government and the Prime Minister that we have to meet the two objectives at the meantime. So it's create a very pressures on the health system, and the 2020 the growth rate of our economic for the whole country is still positive, about 2.9%. So we can say that we meet the two objectives at the same time until now. So in summary, Vietnam has experienced a very low burden of COVID-19, and the bribery successful is the early technical preparedness, contact tracing, timely border closure, physical distancing, and community engagement with the strong political commitment and multi-sectoral and multi-level efforts from the whole countries. For long-term pandemic controlling and prevention, we have to enter the new normal and to still proactively respond to different outbreaks in different situations and locations. With confirmed cases, we still apply the activating process for speedy tracing containing affected area and isolations. And of course, the vaccine implementation is the key action for the futures and to control the epidemic in Vietnam. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Kwok. That was, you've added on the dimension of epidemiology and economic development, which is a crisis that many governments are dealing with right now. I'm sure we have a lot of questions for the Vietnam team, but I would request all of you to hold that back till we finish with the Kerala presentation also. Now, I'd like to thank the Vietnam team for their presentation, and we now move on to the Kerala team, who is decided to present the Kerala experience jointly. The three members joining us here are Dr. Rajan Khobragade, who is the Principal Secretary of Health and Family Welfare, Dr. Anish Dias, and Dr. Matthew Numpelli. Dr. Rajan Khobragade is the Principal Secretary, Health and Family Welfare in Government of Kerala. A medical graduate, he joined the elite Indian Administrative Service in 1993 and has held many positions in health and social development sector in the last 27 years. He worked as Joint Secretary and Additional Secretary in the Health Department. He was a project director of the Kerala State AIDS Control Society. He was a team leader in the National Technical Support Unit at UNAIDS in the National AIDS Control Organization, and also the executive director of the Water and Sanitation Project in Kerala and Maharashtra, and also the secretary of the local self-government department, Government of Kerala. Dr. Anish is an associate professor of community medicine and administrative medical officer of the field unit of the Government Medical College, Trivandrum. He is a member of the expert panel of COVID-19 constituted by the Government of Kerala and the public health expert for the Kerala Disaster Management Authority in COVID-19. He's an expert in infectious diseases and has more than 35 publications in national and international journals. The third member of the team, Dr. Matthew Numpally, is a district program officer of the National Health Mission, Ernakulam, and holds additional charge of the social development and palliative care wing of the National Health Mission, Kerala. He worked as a primary care physician and has 12 years of experience working with neighborhood palliative care societies. He has completed a basic certificate course in palliative medicine from the Institute of Palliative Medicine, Calicut. Now, over to Dr. Rajan and his team for the presentation on how Kerala responded to the COVID pandemic.
Thank you very much, Rajiv sir. We will present now People's Movement Against COVID-19 in Kerala. So, in the introduction, Dr. Devki has told Rajiv Sadanandan sir was Secretary Health and also Additional Chief Secretary Health. The amount of work what has been done in last 2 decades and more so in last 5 years is visible. And therefore, when we take a look at many indices in the health, in Kerala stands first, and that is what our Niti Aayog, which is a think tank at the national level, has already declared that in a report. Now I will, tell you briefly what Kerala has been doing for last few years, more so in last 5 years. So when new government has come in 2016, they have launched one very ambitious program, that is a Ardharam project. Now this Ardharam project is completely conceptualized on the basis of the SDG goals, and then this state has adopted SDG goals to formulate the framework and build the capacities of all the field functionaries. And with the Ardharam People campaign, we are all going ahead. Now, while going ahead, in fact, unfortunately, in 2017-18, we have suffered. In fact, first there was a cyclone. Then after that, there was a Nipah attack in 18, and again in 19, we experienced floods. So what was our learning? In fact, we have taken a look at all these things, what state is going through. And it was a conscious decision on the part of the health department and also the government that we need to focus on preparedness. And we have to have a proactive approach. And therefore, as early as in 2019, in the month of May, it was decided that we should strengthen the infectious disease surveillance system in medical colleges, which was always functional, and we should have a collaborated effort at the grassroots level. It was also decided to conduct a mock drill on a similar fashion as countries like Japan and Israel they conduct. So going forward in the month of June, unfortunately, there was a second Nipah outbreak in Ernakulam. My colleague DPM is also here. So we, again in a collaborative mode, we controlled the Nipah outbreak. In September, we start our procurement. And why I'm highlighting this point is because we have already experienced viral attack, Nipah outbreak twice. In fact, it was a conscious decision in the month of September for the inventory in 2020. We should have all the epidemic protection inventory. So we are going forward with, gaining the experience, what we have been doing in the past, understanding that there are problems, and there are problems like novel virus and again crop up, and our preparedness has to be there in place. We then launched in December Ardharam People campaign, and we were going ahead to conduct a mock drill in January. But then in January, as we all know, the whole world in fact started grappling with novel COVID virus. So this is the trajectory with which we were going forward. On 26 January, in fact, very detailed guidelines we have issued, which covers everything for the control and mitigation of any virus outbreak. So where we have reached now, it is a very low transmission as per the ICMR serosurveillance data, with a very high case detection. 1 in every 3 infection, in fact, one is able to detect, with a high testing rates and the lowest mortality, which is only 0.04. That is in spite of the fact that epidemiologically it is a very vulnerable population because of the morbidity due to the non-communicable diseases, demographic vulnerability because of an aging population which is highest in the country, and a high density of population. So in spite of these adversities, in fact, we could have this very coordinated response. Now, next few slides, in fact, my colleague, Dr. Anish, will tell us about epidemiology and other interventions, what we have been doing at the field level and what are our strategies. Over to you, Dr. Anish.
Good evening, all. This is actually our GeoCare dashboard where the data is put in. And we can see that there are more than 1 million people are affected in Kerala, but through you can actually witness the yellow curve, that is the epidemiological curve that of Kerala. And we can see the 1 million cases are distributed over a period of more than 1 year. So this is an example of how we flattened the curve. And we can see that we have achieved a very, very significant lower death rate, that is only 0.4%. When you look at the data, you can see that whenever we have conducted the serosurveillance in India, the Kerala is actually performing much better. That means even though we have achieved or we reported many cases, the actual infections are much lower compared to rest of India. When you are looking at the infection rate per population, you will see that Kerala is #1 in detecting the infection all over India, maybe the #1 state among the big states. But this is because, as we have already pointed out, this is when you are looking at the actual seroprevalence survey, we are much below that of the national average. That means we are detecting more number of cases using, you look at the case fatality rate and you will see that Kerala has got a very low case fatality rate, maybe lowest among the big states of India. And you look at the test per million or test done for population, we will see that Kerala is ahead much compared to other states of India. So we are actually testing more and we are actually detecting more cases, but our death rate is much lower than that of India, maybe comparing the other states, maybe among the lowest of this kind all over the world among the this lower middle income countries. And how we acted, how we achieved all these things, actually we have got, I am trying to describe this in a dozen of strategies that we have implemented in Kerala. It is not finished by this only 1 dozen, but more than that. Before that, the Kerala, that website of DHS Kerala, that is Department of Health Services Kerala, the advisory, you can click and you can see, we have actually given more than 150 guidelines and advisory. And out of that, 94 is generally concerning about public health. Another 56 is related to diagnosis and management. And you can see that our advisories are moving with the outbreak. Whenever the outbreak has got a turn, we actually given an advisory and we were actually motivating our team and we were building the capacity in our team to fight against the new turns of the epidemic. That is how the Kerala government has actually this monitored and intervened in between. Among these 12 strategies, this first one is the first one. When our principal secretary has already mentioned that Kerala is a state where the expatriates are very, very high, and so many people were coming to Kerala as the start of January itself. And we have conducted a survey, that is genetic analysis, which has shown that even if there are thousands of people coming to Kerala from other part of the world, it is not, they are not transmitting the disease for the local population. And these clusters, you can witness that K1, K2, and K3, 3 clusters which formed at the early part of the outbreak is because of the people coming from other states of India. It is not because of people coming from other nations. That means in the initial period, we were highly able to contain the spread from people coming from outside. The number of people coming from outside were in lakhs. And again, we can see that in this curve, we can see that the people were started coming from other part of India, and there was an outbreak in Kerala. And gradually, as the right-hand side, you can see, gradually the state of Kerala is actually we were trapped by the infection. But we were trying to prevent the infection by local implementations of interventions that may be dealt by my colleague, Dr. Matthews. And the third strategy that we have planned is the infrastructure planning. We were expecting a large outbreak. We were doing multiple mathematical modeling so that we were trying to keep the infection rate very low so that we can tackle with our infrastructure in our hand. And we were trying to find out all the beds, maybe 1/3 of the total beds available in our public sector were earmarked for COVID management if there is a crisis occurs. And we planned and we implemented dedicated institutions and facilities to test people and to manage COVID cases. And this is a graph. I am not going to details. We can see that more than 200,000 beds were there to manage mild and moderate cases of COVID in Kerala. And the fourth very important strategy is the surveillance mechanisms that we have built. I am not going to details because of the time constraints. And you can see that rampant antigen tests were actually employed, because in Kerala, we were having the facilities of public primary health centers all over this part of the state. And we were using all primary health centers to test out COVID. And we were converting the CBNAT and TrueNAT facilities available in our TB control program for COVID management. And we were encouraging private sectors for testing. People can go to any private labs and do their testing. We were having dedicated strategies for ILA and SARI cases. And so many cases, so many things that we were doing in surveillance. And actually, we are trying to surveil the genetic variations with the help of central agencies. So, and again, we have got a dedicated mechanism of postpartum surveillance. So we were actually, surveillance may be the heart of the, as everybody said, it is the heart of public health. We were also actually investing more on surveillance mechanisms. And social protection is actually a very important attribute of Kerala's fight against COVID. At the time of lockdown, we were actually very concerned about the people, because the poor segment of people may go out and they may get infected. So the protection of them, their financial protection was a very important concern. And even our socio-cultural consideration and statutory commitments during elections. Actually, we were actually allowing all these things, even and we were keeping our infection rate much low. That is another strategy that we were using in Kerala. And sixth one is the UHC, that is a universal health coverage. Actually, COVID is giving us an enormous opportunity to develop our universal health coverage. I am actually placing this as an example of how Kerala actually implemented the universal health coverage. So we were not only this BPL, that is below poverty line people were given care. We are actually expanding to the above poverty line people. We were actually giving care, not only the testing, treatment, even the transportation. We were actually getting more and more wider aspect of UHC. And this was also given to the entire population of the state. Anywhere and everywhere in Kerala, if a person is willing to take care from the public facilities, it is given free of cost. That is the most important experience that we have in case of UHC. So another is the evidence management, evidence-based clinical management. We have got a state medical board, and we have got medical boards in all institutions where the COVID management were done. And our medical board was acting as a health technology assessment committee to prescribe protocols and clinical management up to date so that we can save our lives. That is the most important strategy that we adopted. Another is we have got post-COVID management centers in all big hospitals and all our family health centers. And we have got eSanjeevani clinics, so that if suppose one person is suffering from some kind of post-COVID clinical manifestation, they can just directly call to the dedicated call centers. That is another thing that we have implemented. And now we are actually going through the COVID vaccination campaign. And as the ICMR zero surveillance is indicated, we have only have less than 15% of our people are affected. And if we want to achieve herd immunity, definitely there should be extensive COVID vaccination. And as compared to other part of India, we are actually trying to increase the COVID vaccination coverage by just taking up indoor stadiums, and we were motivating our people to get vaccinated. And we are trying to convert all the cold chain points to COVID vaccination site. Just like we are immunizing our children, we are trying to immunize the old age people and vulnerable people so that they can escape from the infection. Intersectoral coordination, I have to speak much, so I just am using a strategy. We can just type COVID-19 and Kerala in Google Images. You can see how much the people and our system, our other sister departments acted, and actually got this health system and health machinery was acting as a bandmaster to control or to coordinate all the activities that is happening in COVID. So the 11th strategy, even at the middle of the COVID pandemic, we were trying to protect our general public health services, just like immunization, maternal and healthcare. Even during this time, we have actually got an award from WHO for our non-communicable disease control mechanisms. And the palliative care is going on, even surgeries are going on. Even if our hospital and our health system was little bit strained because of COVID, we successfully managed our non-COVID systems also. So at last but not least, the knowledge sharing and empowering of people. We have got Disha helpline. Anybody and everybody can just call 24/7 to our helpline, and they can get the expert opinion from there. They can, if they need treatment, they can go for eSanjeevani. Our GeoCare dashboard is giving day-to-day basis the databases. It is available to people everywhere in the world. Daily bulletins are published by Government of Kerala, and Chief Minister's media's briefing was happening on a daily basis. And now occasionally it is also coming even now. And we have got very big public campaigns, break the chain campaigns, SMS, they're motivating people to wear masks, hand hygiene, and all of these things are actually happening in Kerala. And I am actually handing over this to my colleague, Dr. Matthews.
Good evening, everyone. I will try to explain how these guidelines and advisories were made practical with Ernakulam as a case study. The Ernakulam is having 3.2 million population and high population density, and there is a considerable number of guest workers, about 6 lakhs, and also elderly 4.5 lakhs. The challenges, the major airport, seaport, and railway station in the state happens between Ernakulam, and also the high population density, floating population, and also influx of patients from neighboring districts of Idiki and Alappuzha was also an issue. The district COVID war room, there were 16 groups with definite roles working as a team in the district to handle COVID-19. And the main work was being carried out in the field. It was by the ward level team, which we called as RRT, Rapid Response Team. There were about 1830 wards in the district with an average of 1,500 population in each ward. And there is a team of Asha, Anganwadi teacher, Kudumbasri, all are from that ward itself, and volunteers, and led by the elected members of that ward. And it is supported by the health system and other departments. So this was the base unit of our field level action. So during the lockdown period, we could manage 500 community kitchen by the LSC with the support of NGOs, and up to 1 lakh people were catered at a time during that period. And there was a method for provision of food materials, medicines, and other essentials at home for the needy people, especially the guest workers and tribal people like that. And there was a definite clear system to address the medical needs of the people. Then post-lockdown, our main concentration was to screen the personnel entering the district through air, railway, sea, and also through road. And screening were done for all, and data capture of all personnel were done, and it was transferred to RRT. And they ensured the quarantine of all the passengers coming from outside Kerala. And also we could ensure safe return of all stranded people, including about 1 lakh guest workers through Shramik trains and special vehicle to their own place. And also this also ensured 50 free quarantine centers for those who have no facilities at home. And also there was provision for paid quarantine at hotels, 100 were there. Then field activities, or field team were doing active monitoring of symptoms and testing, and this propagate the idea of this SMS campaign, social distancing, mask and sanitization in the public. Then quarantine for all primary contacts. During the peak time, it was about 30,000 were there at a time. And also there was observation for the secondary contacts for symptoms, and mass media coverage and promotion was also there. Then the testing, with WISC mobile testing and hub and spoke model testing, we could manage average test per million per day to 2,500, which was fairly good. Then patient management, our main strategy was home quarantine. At the peak time, there were about 8,000 patients at home at any point of time, and the treatment were done with the help of RRT, and it was supported by the primary health centers and the field staff there. Then domiciliary care center was the next innovation, because some patients were not having enough facilities at home, so they were given support through domiciliary care centers arranged by the local sub-governments. Then first line treatment centers for symptomatic patients we also arranged. 20 numbers of FLTCs were there. Some of the FLTCs were upgraded to SLTCs because it was easy to manage in these centers rather than hospitals. So SLTCs were also started, and 3 major COVID hospitals was also there for management. Then the telemedicine follow-up was a main initiative. It was for quarantine, suspects, and also COVID patients on domiciliary care. And it helped them to stay at home, gave the confidence for the patients to stay at home, and they can call at any time to pick up signs, and we could arrange consultation and shifting if for the needy patients. 2 lakh calls were made, 80,000 patients were benefited. 24 doctors and system moderators were involved in that. Then surveillance part, we did surveillance on airport, seaport, railway, market, everything. Then 400 care homes were there where we have done strict surveillance. Then the major point was when during the peak time was the load balancing among hospitals. We had 10 government hospitals and 72 private facilities managing COVID patients who are symptomatic category B and C. So there was all the beds, ICU beds, oxygen beds were incorporated in the software, and they were all entering the daily status of occupancy of beds. And we had a centralized shifting control system and decentralized vehicle management. 120 vehicles were involved, and all the patients were shifted centrally. So there was no issue of non-availability of beds to any patient because of that. So the emergency stabilization centers were also arranged for patients who are at home. When suddenly become symptomatic, they can be transferred and they can be stabilized and then transferred to beds. Like that facilities was also made. Then COVID treatment facilities, as I said, was there in government and private hospitals. Then special focus we have given to 400 care homes with about 20,000 inmates. Then for elderly, we called all the elderly patients by phone, and reverse quarantine actively promoted. Then the palliative care team, 120 nurse-led units are there in the district. They went to patient houses for the medical follow-up of the palliative care patients. 20,000 bedbound patients are there in our district. And we could ensure the safety of these patients. Then special team for guest workers and tribals were made. Let's Reach Out Kerala was a special program for guest workers with the support of Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Then a team of 120 counselors were there for giving the much needed mental health support for the people in quarantine and also for the positive patients. So the trend of our cases is given that we had 2 peaks. Now it is decreasing, and we could manage efficiently. The test positivity peaked up to 15%. Now it is 4%. The death percentage is 0.33. And the more important, no one was denied beds bar treatment due to non-availability of beds in the district. And the public and media had full confidence in the district administration because of all this was. and our public welfare system could be empowered, including health and social welfare. And it was like Rajiv sir said, the private is more in the district, but government could lead the system by taking private hospitals, NGO, and public in full confidence. Thank you.
I will, sum up by telling 2-3 points. One is it was a complete public-led action, which is very nicely facilitated at the district level and the grassroots level. And one point. Now, what do you do? In fact, 30th January, when you get the first case, and then you take the whole population through all these actions and other things, depending on what actually is happening to epidemic. You reach to a stage where, in fact, the serosurveillance clearly indicate that there are only 12% of population, plus minus we can do 5 or 10. So even if we say that 20% population is having antibodies, that means at least 75 to 80% of population is still not infected and they are susceptible to get the infection. So therefore, challenge for us at a programmatic level is, how do we take care of this population now? We have to go ahead with our prevention strategies, but more than that, as in the country, we have rolled out vaccination. Therefore, we are emphatically looking at this, how best we can cover all this population in the faster pace, so that if we add on thing with the vaccination, if we do it, definitely all this population vulnerability will come down. Second point, what we feel at a analytical level, that the number of susceptible population to acquire infection over a period of time definitely will come down by 2-3 factors. One factor is mobile population in any kind of a cohort will more or less will be same. And therefore, in last 1.25 years, this mobile population has already gone through the vulnerabilities. And with the additionally, in fact, vaccination coming in, this number will definitely come down and we will definitely be able to taper. And if we taper, our system is so well equipped that even if there are some minuscule number of infection happening, we will be able to cater to them. So our experience is that whenever any study is showing some kind of input, we take that into a stride and then we build up the system and we go forward. So there is a feedback loop which is present not only at a policy level, but like Matthew said, like at the grassroots level, they do this tweaking and go forward. And my last point is, we build the bridge as we walk. So there may be some gaps, but we will definitely be succeeding in identifying these gaps and strengthen our whole fight against COVID. And we are confident that going forward, we will be definitely overcoming this pandemic successfully. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rajan, Anish, and Matthew for a very informative presentation. Well, to those of us who are listening, the contrast couldn't be more stark. On the one hand, we have Vietnam that has kept the numbers very low and are continuing to do that. But on the other hand, we have Kerala, who is counting their success at a very high level of infection. It's 3,000 versus more than 1 million infections that the two locations are looking at. The public health strategies formed is reasonably the same. It's watching for people from outside the state, looking at the classic trace, track, and quarantine, isolation of infected cases, and so on. But we're thankful to the two teams for a very, what shall I say, very engrossing presentation of how the epidemic was managed in two different scenarios. I'm sure you have a lot of questions, and I'm happy to hand over the task to Devaki to handle the questions that has already come up. Devaki.
Thank you, Rajiv sir, and thank you to our speakers for really taking us through the nitty-gritty of what's happened in the past year. I think for many of us in the audience who are sort of researchers and not as much in the trenches as you all have been, we are now realizing sheepishly how busy you all have been, and the sheer volume of work from genomics to at the population level, political will, through to epidemiology, surveillance, and so on has been breathtaking. So I'll just pull up some of the questions that I've seen. Some of these are directed to individual speakers and some are more generic. So the first is actually to either of our Vietnamese speakers. One of you, I think Dr. Quang, has mentioned multi-sectoral responses. We got an example of that in the case of Kerala with even the community kitchens and some of the other kinds of activities. We were wondering if you could share an example of multi-sectoral responses to COVID-19 in your setting.
Yeah, so in Vietnam, thanks to the political coordination from central level to the community level, so we can achieve a good for example, in the central level, in order to form the Central Committee of COVID-19 committee, it include multi-ministry, including Ministry of Health, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Public Security Services, Ministry of like the that's the finance, and also the vice prime minister is the like the general director of the central committee. So also at the provincial level, we also form a committee like the central level, so we can enroll on this department at the city level to form the committee. And reform in Vietnam, we create a CDC system from provincial level. That's why we can mobilize the resources from different sectors to contribute to the COVID-19 fighting. Yeah.
Thank you. So not only across sectors, but also across levels, right, of governance. So thank you. The next question is actually to our Kerala team, and the question is, what was the role of community health workers in the COVID response in Kerala state?
Yeah, I'll request Dr. Matthew, because he was right at the ground zero to motivate all this community health work.
Community health workers include the JPHNs, junior public health nurses, and junior health inspectors. There were some 5 persons for 30,000 population, and also 1 ASHA worker for 1 ward, that is 1,500 population. And there were the persons leading all the activities, and the team in the ward that include this Anganwadi, Kudumbashree volunteers and other ward member, and these health persons give the technical advice about quarantine, about symptom surveillance, about testing, about treatment at home. All these were done by the so each RRT has a technical person in charge. That is our health field health staff. So thus we could give correct guidance to the community to how to move forward in each situation. So that was the role played by the field health workers.
Thank you for
just
that.
to add 2 points. One is, in fact, they were asked, the role was given regarding the quarantine, also symptom surveillance. And then if the symptoms are of a particular set, then they should have a referral to the COVID hospital. And from there, after the clinical examination, the patients were taken back either at home or to the COVID frontline treatment center or COVID second line treatment center. That is one loop. Second loop, in fact, they have also successfully done is a psychosocial support. Because if there are, in fact, elderly families all alone, in fact, they used to visit and give psychosocial support over and above what our counselors were doing. Third one was regarding these field level workers have also given the medicine which were required to all our NCD drugs, etc., along with other volunteers to all these elderly people in all their houses. Fourth one is, during lockdown period, it was very difficult. So there was a community participation for the food packets or any other thing which is required to families who are kept in the quarantine. In fact, they used to do. Because I'll take a small example. When 3 Wuhan cases came, we were having 3,500 people in quarantine. Those were the primary contact and the secondary contact. And the very positive fact is, not even their parents or their brothers or sister, nobody became positive. So 3 index cases, and all 3 index cases then became clean. And that is the way, in fact, first burst of this outbreak was contained. So there was a huge contribution of this grassroots level functionaries along with the volunteers at the root level.
Thank you, sir. You mentioned a critical aspect in the second of your observations about psychosocial support. One of our other questions relates to that, and the person is asking, how did Kerala overcome stigma towards COVID patients who are returning? I guess these are expatriate who are coming.
So, yeah, so I will request Dr. Anish to respond.
Actually, the stigma for a COVID patient, not for a COVID patient, for a person who can be diagnosed as COVID. For example, a person is coming from abroad, and during the first part of the outbreak, there were huge outbreak in Gulf countries. And if a person is coming from Gulf country, there was people were actually having some kind of a stigma towards that person. So we were trying to teach one of the beautiful things that we Kerala enjoy is our public health system. And we have got a very people with awareness. They can hear we people telling to them what they have to do, what they don't have to do. Or government is actually taking this challenge, because if there is huge burden of stigma, the people will not come forward and they declare their status. So that is a very important thing. So reduction of stigma is actually a very important thing. And we were actually trying to intervene in this particular sociological issues, and directly through our people, maybe through the RRTs, that is the rapid response team, where this community health worker is a part. One of the work done by the community health worker is to just change the attitude of these people towards the people coming from abroad and people diagnosed as COVID, because COVID will not transmit directly through air. It will actually transmit if somebody is actually in a real contact. So those things we have to teach our people, and I think we were successful in that. That is why we were able to control the outbreak also.
Matthew will add 2 points in fact.
We have a good system at the grassroots level. So in 1,500 people, there are 4 persons. One is the ASHA worker, which is selected from the community itself. One is the Anganwadi teacher who takes care of the women and children in that area. And the one is the Kudumbasri system. It's a woman empowerment and poverty alleviation program. Then the elected member. These 4 persons are there. They have good confidence in the community. So through them, we will operate the things. So we will give the correct messages to these persons, and they can change the community. By peer-led approach and all sorts of community work, they can change the person. Even though there is some person that is stigma, they can manage that by talking with them, discussing with them, or the correct things like that. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to learn about the role of these various frontline workers who are really sort of embedded and directly interacting with the community and play a role in kind of building that trust, even issues of compliance. And actually, Dr. Nguyen, you had talked about one of your strategies is, I think, around communication, trust, and compliance. And I'm trying to relate that to one of the questions that's come up around, how was that maintained in your observation in Vietnam, and how will you build on the existing forms of trust that in Vietnam to address issues of vaccine hesitancy? Are you expecting issues of vaccine hesitancy in your country?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I have to say that this is the first time in my career that I have seen the communication strategy so successful with COVID-19 in Vietnam. And what I could learn is the communication comes from not only the public health sector, not only from the government, but the government was so smart to involve people in the community, people like old people, children, artists, singer, everyone in the society could find their own way to communicate with others about how important it is to prevent the transmission because Vietnam is low middle income country, we cannot handle big outbreak. And the information was sent out consistently. Secondly, all the fake news was early detected and put down, and people who transmit the fake news receive a big fine, and they was announced on public, so people feel ashamed to sending incorrect information, and then less fake news occur in Vietnam compared to many other countries. And regarding your question about vaccines, fortunately, the vaccine program in Vietnam so far has been operated quite well. More than 90% of children in Vietnam were vaccinated with the 6 kind of vaccine that are promoted by the government. With the COVID vaccine-19, there's some survey suggesting that over 90% of people in Vietnam want to have vaccine. Now we are having a discussion of who to get the vaccine first, not who disagree to get the vaccine. Of course, there will be some resistance. However, the government is very transparent about the adverse event of the few hundred people who just got vaccinated in the last 2 days. So people could follow, observe, and decide themselves. But I believe that it's not an obstacle in Vietnam.
Wow, that is an obstacle in very, very many countries. So it's encouraging to hear and requires certainly further study. We have, I'm mindful of time. We don't have a lot of time, but the questions are really sort of rolling in. There's a question around how sociocultural activities were kept ongoing even while trying to keep cases low. And I think that that's for our colleagues from Vietnam to talk about, keeping activities going and that balance between sociocultural activities, economic productivity, and also epidemic control. Any thoughts on that from our colleagues in Vietnam? I don't know if that...
Let me take this. So I think it's very tough for the government to balance between the to maintain the social activities and between the epidemic. So I think we have a very good strategy that the centralized system that the chairman of the city of each city have to be in charge of the epidemic on his own province. So based on the evolution of the epidemics, that the chairman of the city have to release the directive of the public gathering or social distancing. So we don't have this like in the whole country, but only implement the restricted strategy in some focal outbreak or in some certain city. So based on the evaluation regarding the new number of cases, then we release the restriction day by day, and we updated the strategy day by day. That's why in some province we still maintain the normal activity. In some city with the outbreak, then we implement the restriction. So in overall, it's not the whole country lockdown. So I think in terms of economic growth, we still can maintain the positive growth rate with 2.9%. But obviously the tourist industry is affected very strongly in terms of the income from the tourists. Is very bad.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Quang. I'm struck that tourism is a big part of the economy in the state of Kerala as well, as it is in Vietnam. But I'm digressing. So there's one more question about the role that technology has played in the COVID response, and this is for both settings. So whoever would like to take that, that may end up having to be our last question for today. So can I invite the Kerala team to?
Yeah, thank you. Technology, of course, in fact, is a backbone, because whatever each and every activity, what all of us are doing is getting captured in one or the other way. And this whole data management is done on a technology platform. So if we take the most important thing in an epidemic is lab testing, and what is the result of the lab, and whether that test results are again going back to the person, and also correct test results are coming to the required places. So if we take a lab management development system, so in the state of Kerala, any test anywhere, if it is done, whether it is a government laboratory or the private laboratory, it is mandatory that they should be registering with the government of Kerala. And whatever number of tests which are happening, those tests and the result will be uploaded in this software. So that is just one area where what I am highlighting, where the whole management, which one can do disaggregated data analysis at the state level, and whatever parameter one want to take, whether it is age specific or gender specific or a region specific or sub-region specific, that is possible. The second thing is the other data, what Dr. Matthew has showed us, load balancing. So there are multiple parameters which are coming, infrastructure related. Then second thing is the patient related. Third one is the lab test result output. Now, all of a sudden, suppose there is a surge, and every day, if one is getting 10,000 plus cases, how you are going to respond? So what every district have done, in fact, they are having a complete tile ready of the beds which are available. Beds with oxygen, beds in ICU, beds with oxygen in the wards, and how many number of beds are there in the frontline treatment center and the second line. So what used to happen is, depending on the number, at a glance, in fact, they were knowing the nearest place where there is a occupancy a little bit high, then online itself, they used to divert. So there is another chain in this unit to transport the patient. So here in the state of Kerala, as Dr. Anish has said, that when the detection happens that one is positive, the ambulance goes to the house, picks up the patient safely in a partitioned ambulance and brings it to the home. I think nowhere in the country, in fact, that kind of a system is functioning. And here in Kerala, in fact, last 1.25 years, it is continuously happening. Whenever any detection happens, it goes. That is also done on a technology platform, because then ambulance, which is the nearest ambulance, they are told, they go to the place and then bring it. So this way, the integration of all this information, one is the ambulatory services, second is the lab related output, third one is the hospital to provide the treatment. Unless and until it is an integrated approach, it is very difficult. Now, if we forget, if suppose imagine that there is no computer and there is no such system available. So if we are going back, say 30 years, what one would have done? I think it would have been left to the chance, and people would not have come to the place where they should be. And this whole thing is possible because of technology. The another fourth one advantage of the technology is the analytical part. Be it a genome study or be it a serosurveillance study, and then, you know, layer on layer, you take a data and do analysis and do drilling down that where are the active foci of infection and what are the probable areas from where the infection is coming. So once you are having all these information source gathered in a very structured way, all these tables and correlation, if we do, in fact, it is possible for us by use of this technology to understand which are the most vulnerable population, which are the most vulnerable areas, and which are the problem areas which are giving us this newer number of cases. So these are some of the dimensions which I think technology has helped us immensely. And going forward, by taking the data, we can do the predictive analysis. What is going to happen, in fact, if everything is constant and going in this way, in fact, one will be able to say that one will be able to get this. And that is what is, I think, we were getting a lot of inputs regarding the reproduction rate and how the epidemic is going to behave. And even Raju sir on a weekly basis is giving us those kind of input, which in fact, when we do a back series analysis, most of this forecasting, what is there, in fact, is fitting into the what actually has happened. So it is just, I think, the amazing thing which is happening. Many other advanced nations, I think, perhaps maybe doing, better. But I would still say that the way this technology has put to use and put to use at a grassroots level in the state of Kerala is pretty satisfactory. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Would our Vietnamese colleagues like to talk about the role of technology? And I'm afraid this will have to be the last question as we're out of time, but keen to hear about the role of technology in Vietnam's response.
I think Dr. Kuang may be the best person to answer this question.
Dr. Kuang?
Want to take?
Yes, for the technologies that we apply in Vietnam, so there are two main application that we have implemented successfully in Vietnam. So one is we call the nCoV applications, which use the levels, and the others is Bluezone applications that for contact tracings using the application on the smartphone. We can own the contact near to the confirmed cases and suspected cases. And the for the nCoVs, it's mandatory for all the Vietnamese citizens have to declare on the information regarding the contacts and also the history of travelings and the symptom suspected symptom of COVID-19. And with this application, then we can have a centralized contact tracing team that we can do the contact tracing at the central level, and at each city we also have a team to do the contact between the techniques and also the real-time working group from the public security department that we are successfully make a very rapid contact tracing, and that's why we can stop the transmission very quickly.
Thank you so much. This has been very interesting. I'm sure there are lots of follow-up questions, but in the interest of time, I defer to our chair to conclude this session. Thank you all.
Thank you, Devaki. I don't know whether you noticed that both Kerala and Vietnam teams were talking in the past tense. No, this has been handled, and the level of confidence of both the teams are actually very humbling. That the feeling that you've gone through a very difficult period and come out successful, and a lot of lessons that have been shared with all of us. Congratulations to both the teams, both present and those who are not present. I'd like to thank the speakers today, as well as the people who posted questions. Some very interesting and very probing questions were posed, and also all those who participated in this today. I'd also like to thank the organizers for letting us organize this session, and to Devaki and her entire team that has set this up. Thank you very much.